If you've ever played this game, you'll no doubt recognize this iconic guitar riff that plays as this colorful cast of characters slide into your screen, welcoming you into the menu. Chances are, though, you've never even heard about this game until now, so let me do the honors. Full Metal Furies is a team-based action-adventure, co-op, brawler, beat-em-up, puzzle, RPG, that can be right, created by the independent Canadian studio Cellar Door Games, released in 2018 following the success of their previous and first commercial PC/console game Rogue Legacy. Its sequel, Rogue Legacy 2, was launched in early access in 2020, where it sat pretty for 2 years, receiving constant updates, love and care, until the 1.0 was finally released in 2022 to commercial and critical acclaim. You've probably heard of those, right? Rogue Legacy was a big deal back in 2013, and people were eager for the sequel to come out. Full Metal Furies, not so much. It was even considered a pretty massive failure by the studio itself. Oh no. However, FMF, as it's popularly referred to, was a rather fresh take on the litany of genres it decided to tackle. The combat is fast-paced and chaotic while never being unreadable, the RPG mechanics throw in some variety and encourage trying out the different characters, and the lots of puzzles, riddles and logic tests keep your mind active in between the fights, searching for clues on how to solve them. This all leads to a story that explores much deeper and complex topics than one would probably expect upon starting the game.
In this essay,
I will conduct an in-depth analysis of the themes and messages the game attempts to convey through its narrative and art direction. There's a lot to tackle here, in terms of underlying social and political topics buried under layers of metaphor and satire that can easily be missed by focusing solely on the visible plot of the game, and that get a bit muddled by the end. We will get to all of that, of course, but before we begin, it's essential to note that this video will contain discussions of very sensitive and complex subjects, such as war, fascist ideology, especially that of Nazi Germany, the concept of genocide, and the Holocaust. Extreme viewer discretion is advised. I will do my best to make this video as light and upbeat as I possibly can, but these are some heavy topics, so if at any point you feel like it's too much, you're absolutely free to leave. The video will be divided into chapters, so it's easier to navigate and to watch in more than one sitting, because I imagine it's going to be a bit long. I welcome any discussion of said topics in the comments, as long as it's in a respectful and civilized way. I will block you if you decide to be an asshole. You've been warned. Now, let's talk about the game. We are going to start with an overview of the game's narrative, to set the base for what we'll be diving into later on. Don't worry though, it's not going to be one of those videos. Needless to say, massive spoilers for the totality of Full Metal Furies. I don't think spoilers ruin the experience of playing the game, but I will be talking about some secrets and puzzle solutions as well as the story, so you may want to play it for yourself before you watch this video. It's a good game, I absolutely recommend giving it a go, I had a lot of fun with it. This video will be waiting for you when you're done. Just maybe give it a like before you go? That will help a lot. Okay, bye. Our story takes place in a universe where the world is ruled by Titans, deities from Greek mythology. The king of the Titans, Prometheus, has been slain. This event has sparked a terrible succession struggle between the other Titans that threatens to destroy the world. As we can see right off the bat, the game already throws us a curveball during the very first shots of its opening sequence. The story takes place in a reality where myth and magic are very real. The world has remained, artistically and culturally, in the classical era, with humanity being reigned and ruled by all-powerful beings from ancient origin. But if we look closely, we notice that, alongside the things you'd expect to see in an epic titan battle, like minotaurs and axes and magic, there are also grenades and machine guns, and... is that a freaking scorpion dude with a sniper rifle stinger? Yo, that's dope! But anyway, technology, and specifically that devoted to warfare, has advanced way past the point of every other aspect of society or civilization in this world. This is relevant and will make sense as the story progresses, and its presence in conjunction with the aesthetic look of the world is very significant to the game's overarching messages. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. After an initial battle between these mighty beings and their armies levels the world, the Titans are forced to regroup and rebuild their forces. Humanity is gifted with a brief respite, but this period of peace is soon to be over, and the world will not be able to survive another war. We are then introduced to our 4 protagonists. The game's plot centers on a group of 4 human adventurers whose objective is to fight and defeat the Titans, stopping the war and saving humanity. The main character, so to speak, is Triss, the stoic, all-business, no-fun leader of our titular group. She is very firm in her convictions, wants nothing more than to stop the war and bring the world to how it was before, and will stop at nothing to achieve it. Her beliefs will be tested throughout the game, but she will always find a way to overcome her doubts and reach her objective, even if it may have changed by the end. The only thing she loves more than sipping tea is doing spit takes. You can't help but root for her and find her conviction and perseverance against incredible odds admirable. Erin is the engineer and tech genius of your squad. She has managed to create some amazing gadgets like drones and energy trackers and is fluent in ancient languages, making her a huge nerd and an indispensable part of her team, especially when it comes to the overarching narrative. She also loves fun trivia. Way too much. She is adorable and I will protect her. Then we have our lovable, hot-headed and explosive Alex, the brawler of the group. She is prone to anger, loves a good fight and does not enjoy fun trivia. She is aggressively loyal, caring and truly has a heart of gold, which balances her character perfectly, making her just the sweetest. And finally, Meg. I absolutely love Meg. She is so fun with her complete aloofness and sleepy attitude contrasting with her extreme accuracy, she is the sniper of the group after all, an inhuman sense of smell. And she creates some of the funniest moments in the game with her deadpan delivery and delightful non sequiturs. Now, on with our mission. The Furies must find and stop each of the 3 main titans leading the war before they plunge the world into chaos and destruction once more. The first titan you set your target on is Menocious, an absolute Chad! Sorry. A complete idiot, who is obsessed with his physique, can go 5 seconds without flexing, loves exaggerated poses, and... Wait. Is this a dated reference? His whole shtick is that he is very strong, therefore he would make an excellent ruler for humanity, and should be the one to replace Prometheus as Supreme King or whatever. Upon witnessing your strength, he becomes very fond of the idea of you joining his ranks, since you could teach his soldiers a thing or two about gold and bravery. And he even offers to make you his royal guard, since you just defeated the guys who occupy said position. He makes a rather valid point, however, when he mentions that your current objective is flawed, since wars only end when there is a victor. If all the titans are defeated, there would still be a huge power vacuum and the world would remain without a ruler, since Prometheus is dead, which at this point in the story is still an inconceivable situation for everyone involved. Once you finally confront him at his den/first high altitude training gym, he once again offers you to help him conquer the world, but after refusing, the battle begins. After being defeated, he questions your motives. You reply that you are ultimately fighting for humanity but are still loyal to Prometheus and are waiting for his return. He mentions how the world wasn't exactly perfect under his rule, but you are convinced that it wasn't as bad as it is right now, and that it can always be done better. Before death, he warns you that the other titans cannot be allowed to win, since they fight only for themselves, unlike Menocious who, despite everything, still fought for humanity. After defeating Menocious, you gain access to his intelligence reports and are able to get a lead on the rest of the titans. The next target on the list is Titan Coeus, the creator of the war's many weapons of mass destruction. Meg manages to track him down by the smell of his keratin shell being burned by his constant explosive trials, which apparently smells like farts. You, as a player, are reminded of this many times. Also of note, Coeus is a jerk, and he likes to blow farts at you, which, again, farts. This section is surprisingly fart-centric. After pursuing him through the Foloi forest and destroying the generator of the crystal wall he was hiding behind, confront him and beat him, proving to him that you are a force to be reckoned with. He takes notes of your abilities and flees in order to perfect his weapons and strategy, expecting to gain the upper hand next time you face each other on the battlefield. You are then forced to take a big detour since he has retreated behind yet another crystal wall, its generator this time being hidden in the depths of a place called the Stygian Well. In order to go to the Stygian Well, you must traverse a very easy labyrinth, fight some tough guardians, and ignore the warnings of Titan Coeus about the horrors that lurk beneath the earth in that place. Once you arrive at a sort of coliseum in the middle of nowhere, you realize it's actually an elevator-like platform that will take you down, deeper and deeper, descending downwards into the darkness of the depths. Talk about alliteration, huh, Cellardor? There, you meet Titaness Styx, the only female Titan, a non-combatant in the war being waged between the others. She is happy to be left to her own devices in her queendom, with her adorable three-headed puppy, and does not appreciate your trespassing. You try to explain to her that all you need is to destroy the wall generator hidden in her domain, but she is not willing to put up with you for even a second and sends her armies against you. Once the third level down is reached, having defeated numerous hordes of enemies and some admittedly weird bosses, you finally find the generator and are able to destroy it, making it possible to go up and finally confront Coeus again. However, you may also choose to keep going down the Stygian Well to its deepest level, with difficulty steadily increasing as you go. The entire remaining levels of this area are necessary to complete the full game and obtain the actual ending, but can be played at any point, and the game actually suggests that you instead retake the initial objective of defeating Coeus and the remaining Titans. Since Styx is not actively participating in the war, there is no real reason for pushing downwards, except for a curious energy reading that Erin has picked up thanks to her technological know-how. I guess this is as good a time as any to mention a few things that have been going on in the background during all these events. Our group has been unearthing ancient stone tablets with riddles and instructions carved into them, containing clues leading to other tablets that, when put together with the previous ones, create some sort of message or code. At the same time, during your travels, you have encountered a series of cloud computers. No, seriously, literal computers sitting on clouds high up in the sky, where you're able to input this code, obtaining some sort of gem fragment. It is not yet clear what this does, but the fragments seem to be part of something bigger that may be worth putting together. But at this point in the story, we know very little about this whole thing, and it seems a bit overwhelming, so again, it is better to resume the task at hand and get back to fighting the Titans. Coeus is now vulnerable, so it is your chance to strike. Once you ascend back up and emerge from the Stygian Well, having destroyed the crystal wall generator, the last level of the Folly Forest has opened up, and you are able to access the final fight against Coeus, this time in a desert biome. This is relevant. He has been patiently waiting for you, having improved his weapons and strategies, and is sure he can beat you since his motivations are so grand. Conquering humanity does not interest him, since his objective is conquering the stars, and with progress as his mission, he will develop the technology to do so. When you inevitably defeat him, he shows what a huge jerk he truly is by attempting to destroy you, and everything in a 100 miles radius, with a freaking nuke! Apparently, his shell can survive extreme proximity to a nuclear detonation. Have you tested that hypothesis there, buddy? I mean, it looks impressive, but it's not exactly a fridge. But before he can pull this ultimate dick move, he gets sniped and killed before your very eyes. And not by Meg, no. By someone much more insidious. Lelantos, the Sniper Titan, takes this opportunity to slay the weakened and exposed Coeus, making himself the only Titan left strong enough to go for the throne. Only you can prevent his ascension, but between you and him extends the immense and treacherous desert of Atlantis, filled with shifting dunes, scorching heat, and deadly mirages. After days of aimless travel underneath the desert sun, tracking the trajectory of his sniper shots and comparing and contrasting heights and lines of sight, you manage to pinpoint his location, a tall dune called Utopia, hidden behind, you guessed it, yet another crystal wall. Once you destroy it, you get a call from Lelantos, where he whines and complains about you having no respect for property or ownership. He also questions you on your loyalty to Prometheus, a titan who was slain before the four of you were even born. You insist that things were better during his rule, but Lelantos then reveals that not only was Prometheus not a good leader, and his fall just a question of time, but that he usurped the throne from the previous ruler, Cronus, father to all titans. This information sounds ominous, but at this point in time you have no way of knowing if there's any truth to his words or if he's just trying to mess with you. Now vulnerable to his long-range sniper shots, since the crystal wall is down, you are forced to advance while dodging enormous and damaging rounds, juggling enemies and obstacles, and fighting some challenging bosses along the way. Finally, you reach ancient Babylon, where you confront Lelantos. Or should I say, Lelantos? Two brothers that have been hiding under a single identity and building a reputation for being invincible. As far as boss fights go, this one has a cool gimmick and can get a bit tricky, but after some difficulty, you manage to beat them both. With his dying breath, the last of the two brothers to be defeated warns you that the crystal walls shouldn't have been used by the titans to defend themselves, since they were erected to seal Cronus away ages ago, when the titans and humanity teamed up to defeat him. Now that 3 of the 4 crystal walls have been destroyed, only one remains standing, since Menocius was too much of a Chad! I'm sorry, I just really like him. To cower behind and protect himself. Lel, or Tos, pleads with the Furies to destroy the last barrier and confront Cronus now, since they might be the only ones powerful enough to stop him. If left to his own devices, he might break out of his prison eventually, and enact his plan of cosmic rearrangement. This event essentially kicks off the second half of the game. There is a lot of plot left to summarize, but for now, we need to make a stop here. My intention with this video is not just to recap the whole game. There have been a lot of things I have omitted so far, about the Titans' motivations, the dialogues, the lore and the gameplay, and especially about the themes and ideas conveyed through narrative, aesthetic and setting. It's time to do a proper, in-depth analysis of the art direction and storytelling of Fullmetal Furies. And in order to do so, we need to talk about Lelantos. So there's something I've mostly glossed over throughout the summary up to this point. I've introduced the game's antagonists, the Titans, as the 3 main baddies you have to defeat in order to save the world. But I haven't really talked about them in any depth, their views, their aspirations. From the very start of the game, we know what the Titans' objective is. They are waging war against one another in order to become the new king of the Titans, now that Prometheus is gone. However, during our quest to defeat them, we end up getting to know each of them a lot better. They question our loyalty to Prometheus and try to justify their bid for the throne by explaining why they would be the ideal ruler of the world, and by doing so reveal a whole lot about their ideology and their views on humanity and power. And this is where Lelantos started to stick out like a sore thumb to me. Similarly to Menocius and Coeus, he's portrayed as slightly multifaceted, quippy, with multiple sprites portraying emotions like overconfidence, exasperation, embarrassment. But there was a difference. This treatment of the main Titans as fun, lovable, and even relatable characters felt justified to me thus far. One of them is a gym-loving jerk with a fondness for poses and a heavy disdain for cardio, whose entire philosophy seems to boil down to humanity needs to be ruled by a superior being, a firm but just leader of perfect judgment. And the other is a giant, house-moving castle-ass turtle who thinks that, since wars push technological and scientific progress, any destruction and loss of life caused by war can be justified by the benefits this progress will bring about for the world at large. And listen, far from perfect. Problematic, to say the least. But at least they make some sense. I could see someone getting behind them in a Scar from the Lion King was right kind of way, but not Lelantos. When I finally found out what his intentions were, I was actually taken aback by how dark it felt, in contrast to the rest of the game. In his view, the end of the war can only come about through genocide. This third main villain of the game, with his cute little sprites and silly moments of banter and flustered exasperation, was actively planning to carry out a global genocide to establish one race as the only inhabitants of the world, honestly arguing that this would mean the end of humanity's problems and disputes. Triss's reaction to this horrible revelation also struck me as oddly lukewarm, pushing back against this abysmal outlook as calmly as she did when talking to Menocious. So, why? Up until that point, the game had only presented fun, if flawed characters with iffy but ultimately justifiable goals. Wars do advance scientific and technological progress exponentially, which in turn improves the lives of millions of people. And most empires and civilizations that we considered great and now inspiring nowadays weren't exactly democracies. Again, problematic, yes, but why would they suddenly introduce such an abhorrent, nonsensical philosophy and treat it as valid or even comparable to the others? Why was it apparently normalizing something so terrifying? And then it hit me. Maybe the game wasn't normalizing this idea by equating it to the others, but instead calling those other two ways of thinking into question as well. Maybe they had more in common than I thought at first glance. Maybe, in fact, they all belong together, at some point in time, in a different world. The Titans' beliefs, ideas and principles, when combined, result in the ideology of Germany's Nazi Party, and of its leader, Adolf Hitler. The best way to explore Hitler's beliefs is through his infamous manifesto, Mein Kampf, which he wrote both as a political autobiography and as a compendium of his ideas. In his first volume, titled Die Abrechnung, The Settlement of Accounts, or The Revenge, not ominous at all, he wrote about World War I, the betrayal of Germany's collapse, whatever that means, and, most importantly, his incredible, searing racism. Like, we're talking Hitler levels here, obviously. Let's talk about his political stance first. Hitler believed that every law, principle and action must serve the interest of the Volk, the people, and that the will of the Volk could only be discerned by the Führer, an individual endowed with perfect authority. If you recall, this model of totalitarian government is exactly what Menocious was arguing for. Titans live for millennia, so humans are like children in their eyes. They need to be ruled by an absolute, flawless leader who'll always know what's best for them. And now, on to his views regarding race. Buckle up. Hitler thought inequality among races, nations and individuals was part of a natural order, and that the Aryan race, to which the German people belonged, was the greatest. The Jews, on the other hand, were parasites, and their elimination was of international significance and must necessarily be a bloody process. Holy shit. According to him, it was the sacred mission of the German people to assemble and preserve the most valuable racial elements and raise them to the dominant position. All who are not of good race are chaff. Germans must occupy themselves not merely with the breeding of dogs, horses and cats, but also with care for the purity of their own blood. Yikes, huh? more like eugenics, am I right? Jesus fucking Christ. This is literally Lelantos' whole perspective. In one of the most revealing and significant cutscenes in the game, Lelantos contacts the Furies by radio, believing he owes them a debt of gratitude since, thanks to them, no Titan remains that can oppose his reign. My people shall rule once more, and a new utopia will dawn upon this world. When asked what he means by his people, he replies, My people are of old Babylonian blood, a race that claimed fealty to me long ago. And today the seeds shall be sown for the rise of a new Babylon, with one culture and one race. Hitler also hated Marxists, and Russians, and people of color, especially Roma and Sinti, and homosexuals, of course, and called for revenge against France, and blamed Great Britain's naval blockade as one of the reasons for German surrender in World War I. You know, we could be here the whole day just talking about Hitler's seething hatred for everyone, basically. To quote John Lukács, author of The Hitler of History, from youth, Hitler already showed traits that characterized his later life. Loneliness and secretiveness, a bohemian mode of everyday existence, and hatred of cosmopolitanism and of the multinational character of Vienna. Going back to that conversation with Lelantos, he states, "Cultures clash, and difference breeds hatred for your fellow man. It's ironic how you, Furies, a shining example of the melting pot mistake that makes up this world, helped bring about the New Order." Hitler was named Chancellor in January of 1933 and rose to full power by March of the same year, beginning what's known as the Third Reich, Third Realm or Third Empire, claiming Nazi Germany was the successor to the Holy Roman Empire and German Empire. He established an absolute dictatorship, obtaining supreme command of the armed forces, with officers and men taking an oath of allegiance to him personally. Wait, taking an oath of allegiance to him? Nazi Germany being the successor of empires of old?
Hey, wait a minute.
This shit is textbook Lelantos. Or rather, Lelantos is textbook Hitler, I guess. Man, weird how we keep going back to this one conversation, huh? How does it end anyway? Oh yeah, that. I forgot we also had to talk about that. To make sure we're all on the same page, genocide is broadly defined as the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group, with the aim of destroying that nation or group. For a recent example, we just have to look at the ongoing occupation of Palestine by the State of Israel. If you'd like to learn more about this, at the top of the description below I've linked some videos that explain the whole situation in detail, along with resources and ways to help the people in Gaza, the region that's been affected the most by these horrific events. I encourage you to check them out, even if all you're able to do is share them around. It helps more than you know. Free Palestine. As we mentioned earlier, Hitler considered everyone not of Aryan blood as inferior or impure. However, the brunt of his hatred was directed towards one particular group. From 1933 onward, the Nazi German regime and its allies and collaborators carried out the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and elimination of 6 million European Jews. This horrific campaign of segregation, mass incarceration, slave labor and finally mass murder has come to be known as the Holocaust. The reasons for its execution are many, but it could have never been achieved without centuries of anti-Semitism that laid the groundwork for the dehumanization of Jewish people, and without Hitler's inflammatory rhetoric and constant propaganda, blaming them for every single problem facing Germany since their defeat at World War I and before. Some people conflate the imprisonment and killing of the at least 5 million Slavs, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, Romani, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals and other victims of the Nazis with the Holocaust. This is not correct. These were all genocides, yes, and part of Hitler's plan for a strong and superior Germany, pure of blood and of Aryan race. However, the Holocaust refers exclusively to the attempted extermination of the Jewish people. Going back to the game, Lelantos never makes any direct reference to the Holocaust, thankfully. He considers his people, those of old Babylonian blood, to belong to a superior race, but has no hatred towards any other specific group, considering them all to be equally inferior. His plan is to erase all other peoples and cultures until only one remains, arguing that you can strike your fellow man because you do not see him as your companion. But with one society, one people, those differences would be removed. And claiming that, under his rule, there would be peace. So, to recap, Menocius represents totalitarianism, the ruling of the people, or the Volk, as the Führer would, proclaiming to be a perfect and questionable leader, no dissension tolerated. Coeus is standing for the abhorrent actions carried out in the name of progress, be it scientific or technological. The arms race that took place during World War II, culminating in the deployment of the nuclear bombs, to which Coeus tries to literally drop a reference to, is a good example of this perspective taken to the extreme. But if we focus on the Nazis, we just have to take a look at the long record of horrific experiments performed in the name of science. Very dark stuff, don't look it up. And finally, Lelantos embodies all of Hitler's harmful, pervasive beliefs about race and mythological history, and how that inflammatory rhetoric led to some of the worst crimes ever committed in human history. The specific combination of these three makes a pretty good case for the particular flavor of fascism that was Hitler's Nazi Germany. But I believe it goes a bit deeper than that. To me, the entire narrative of Fullmetal Furies can be viewed as an allegory for World War II itself. The game is littered with references, hints and parallelisms, right from the very beginning in fact. So, let's take it from the top. At the start of the game, we're introduced to a world already ravaged by a devastating war for succession that has raged on for over a century. We begin the story in a brief window of peace since the remaining Titan leaders are currently regrouping their forces and rebuilding their strength. However, a second war is coming, far too soon after the last, and it will cause irreparable damage to the world. I don't think I need to point out what this is a clear reference to, but this is not the only hint we get from this opening sequence. Literal deities from Greek mythology rule over a world artistically reminiscent of the classical era. This is no coincidence, since the Nazis idolized ancient Greece and Rome, historically and aesthetically. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf that there was a racial unity that linked Greeks, Romans, and Germans, and that these three peoples were united in fighting the same millenarian war. Yeah, I don't understand what he was on either. Just take a look at some pictures from the Great German Art Exhibition of 1938 to get an idea of how influential classicism was in Germany at the time. And it wasn't just the Nazis. Remember the fascists that Mussolini used as an emblem? Italian fascists were obsessed with ancient Rome. You could say it was their Roman Empire? And they had no shortage of symbols to fall back on. The triumphal arches, the Colosseum. Rome is full of powerful and effective imagery. It isn't hard to find examples of ancient sculptures and architecture throughout the game. Most of them are in ruins, however, either having been damaged during the war or from dating back centuries or even millennia in some cases. But if we take a closer look, we can actually find more modern and lived-in buildings and structures scattered around. Well, lived in until the war broke out, that is. They all seem abandoned now. This is the first area of the game, the ruins of Thessaly. In our world, Thessaly, or Thessalia, is a geographic and administrative region of Greece. However, in the game, it's a snowy, forested city, more reminiscent of Eastern Europe than anywhere near the Mediterranean coast. It's far from an ideal winter wonderland though, with semi-collapsed houses, supply crates, cement sacks, and barbed wire everywhere. The town has clearly been suffering from constant bombardments and artillery strikes, as you can see darkened patches of exposed cobblestones in the streets and blown-out buildings crumbling in the distance. It's a very depressing sight, not too dissimilar to the Eastern Front during World War II. When Germany began its expansionist conquest of Europe, their first objectives were their neighboring countries to the east, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, then Denmark, Norway, all the way up to Russia, where they were stopped by the Soviet Union at the outskirts of Moscow. Images from the Eastern Front paint a familiar picture. After defeating Menocius and leaving Thessaly, you reach the Pholoi Forest, which similarly is named after an oak forest on the plateau of the Pholoi mountain in the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Greece. This forest is dense and lush, but just as dangerous and war-torn as Thessaly was, filled with landmines and enemy campsites waiting to ambush you at every turn, not to mention the constant artillery tests being performed by Coeus all over the region. Again, this section of the game feels very reminiscent of the Western Front of World War II, that mainly involved France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. One of the decisive battles of the war was the Battle of Hürtgen Forest, that spanned 3 months and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. When looking at pictures taken at the time, the similarities become clear. Finally, after getting past Coeus, we reach the dreaded Desert of Atlantis, a vast sea of dunes filled with snipers, encampments, and all kinds of explosives. The look and feel of this area is clearly inspired by the North African campaign of World War II, that spread across the Libyan and Egyptian deserts, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Here are some of the game's background assets to really show the obvious 40s aesthetic. And listen, I do realize it's a bold claim to argue that this game is an allegory for World War II and the rise of fascism. I think I've presented some rather compelling evidence to prove my point, but I'd understand if some of you thought, okay, that's a valid reading of the plot, but it's surely not what the people who made the game were going for. And while it would be easy to go, death of the author, original intent is worthless, deal with it, I kind of agree. There's really no way to know for sure if the developers really wanted to say anything more than, what if Kratos but based, when making this game? Other than asking them, I guess. So I wrote an email to Teddy, captain of the chess club Lee, lead writer and designer of Full Metal Furies, wondering if I could ask him some questions about the game, to which he graciously replied. The full interview will be linked down in the description for those interested, but I'll read out some of his answers as they become relevant. The artistic and aesthetic setting of the game is not only inspired by classical Greece, but also by the 40s and 50s, and more specifically, World War II. Why was this choice made? Mostly because it was cool. Wow, thanks, Teddy. Oh, there's more. But we also picked World War II because we knew we wanted the meta story to be about warring political ideologies, so mixing those two settings felt like a really great fit. Ah, there we go, see? I know what I'm talking about. Now, before we move on, it's worth mentioning that every single enemy you fight in this game is either male, or male presenting at least, or lacking a clear gender. And even when that's the case, they all treat you being female as an exception, an oddity. And this is especially true for the Titans. Oh, hold on, I see someone typing a comment down below. Let's see. The mere existence of Styx invalidates this whole point. Wrong, you moron. Styx is the only female Titaness? Titaness, right? However, she is also the only Titaness you can't fight against. All of the Titans get their own boss fight where they face you directly and get their ass kicked. But not Styx. When you reach the bottom of the Stygian well, you fight her champion instead. Her strongest warrior, her personal guard, the ferryman of Hades, Charon. Moreover, she is the only Titan that is not participating in Prometheus' succession war. She is a non-combatant, as stated by Alex when intruding in her domains. In fact, there's only one other character in the whole game you can interact with but not fight against. And that character is... the Shopkeep, an allied NPC from our camp. And, wouldn't you know, she's female as well. The only women who do any actual fighting in this game are, of course, our four main characters. Fighting for peace, seeking to end the war, leading a revolution, even if they didn't intend to at first. So, with all that being the case, does this game by any chance have anything to say about... Now, folks, don't worry. I'm not gonna argue that feminism is good. Because it is. See? No argument there. But we're still gonna talk about it. Because it's relevant. And because I want to. Sue me. Before we begin, two quick disclaimers. When I speak about women, I am referring to all those who identify as women, who have been socialized as women, or who don't feel represented by the broadly accepted gender binary, since they all suffer from a similar form of discrimination and oppression. And, of course, when I speak about men, I don't mean all men, as in every individual man exhibits all of these behaviors, but rather every person who identifies as a man or has been raised or socialized as a man is exposed to these societal norms and factors and is inevitably affected and shaped by them in some way. With that out of the way, what's feminism? As an idea, it's the belief that all genders should be fully equal in all aspects of society. As a political theory, it studies how women have been understood, considered and treated throughout history and aspires to change it. Now this is where some people tend to get it wrong. Feminism does not seek for women to swap positions with men in the current social balance. All it tries to achieve is a truly equal society where everybody has access to all the rights and opportunities currently enjoyed by men, so don't get it twisted, okay? As a matter of fact, feminism also fights for men, ironically trying to save them from themselves and their self-imposed role in society. But to understand what that role is, we need to define a concept that will be key to everything we're about to discuss: the patriarchy. It refers to a socio-political system that places men in charge of every aspect of society. It sees men as inherently dominating and endowed with the right to rule over the weak, in this case women and children. This control is maintained through physical and emotional violence, and repression of the individual's emotions, will, and thoughts that deviate from the authority figure's way of thinking. If this is sounding incredibly familiar to you, you'd be right on the money. Patriarchy, fascism, and totalitarianism all go hand in hand, since they are all fundamentally based on the subjugation of the weak by the strong. To answer the question, why are all the enemies in the game male, we first have to ask, are men inherently violent? The will to use violence is not linked to any innate biological factors, but to the societies we exist in, that value hierarchy, control, and power. Boys and men in our society are indoctrinated, almost from birth, to believe that at some point they must be violent, whether psychologically or physically, to prove that they are men. However, in our patriarchal culture, Women can be as violent as men toward the groups they have power over and can dominate freely, often children and weaker females. Styx isn't any less violent because she doesn't physically engage in a fistfight with you. She repeatedly refuses to listen when you try to explain why you're in her realm, treats you in an incredibly dismissive and condescending way, even by the other Titan standards, and sends wave after wave of enemies with the intention of killing you simply because she finds you annoying. And the Furies are arguably the most violent characters in the story. I mean, they spend the entire game fighting pretty much everyone they meet, right? We'll get back to that in a second, but as far as I can tell, no, aggression and violence are not inherently men's prerogatives. What about war, though? That one's trickier. When humans abandoned the nomadic lifestyle and started to build houses, plant crops, and raise cattle, the bigger the settlement was, the more powerful it became. Men were biologically stronger, in average, so they formed armies to defend their lands, while women mostly stayed home, giving birth to future warriors and baby makers. In times of war, men's control of the armed forces gave them control of civil society as well. They then used it to unleash more and more wars, and the greater the number of wars, the greater their control of society. This feedback loop explains both the ubiquity of war and the ubiquity of patriarchy. Neat trick, huh? As we find out from Lelantos, in the days of old, humanity joined the Titans to defeat Cronus, the patriarch, and Prometheus was made king. Now that he's gone, all the male Titans, along with their very male armies, are fighting over the throne. But I mentioned the Furies earlier, and how they're basically waging a war of their own against the Titans. And while that seems to invalidate the previous point, I believe they're doing something different. I believe they're fighting what I would refer to as a necessary war. Can war ever be necessary? Only when its objective is to stop something indisputably worse than war itself. Fascism, by its very nature, necessitates war, to justify its own existence, to expand and to thrive. If we let fascism grow, war will be all we know. So, ironically, the only way to prevent war is to wage war against fascism and those who support it. And while we're in the topic of anti-fascism, what could be more revolutionary than feminism? Yeah, baby, full circle! Feminism is intrinsically revolutionary, because it dismantles the ideas of gender roles and female inferiority. The foundation of patriarchy and fascism, the division of a people into the weak and the strong, is shattered by the feminist effort to build a truly egalitarian society, based on solidarity, diversity, respect, and recognition. Now, I don't actually think the Furies are meant to represent the feminist revolution that will take down the patriarchy once and for all. Sadly. I mean, where's that game? I wanna play that game. And the reason most enemies are male is obviously not some anti-men messaging or anything like that. Teddy even confirmed as much during our interview. That totally came about by accident. I definitely wanted Fullmetal Furies to have a strong message about female empowerment, but we didn't want to write a story where the moral was, women are more powerful and better than men. I find that kind of social messaging to be overbearing and has a negative effect on what you're trying to convey. So we just wrote a story about powerful people who happen to be women. Which is perfectly fine. In fact, this reading of the story being so clear and present despite being unintended makes it even more interesting to me. Subconsciously, you created a narrative where women are the revolutionary force that's fighting to stop the fighting, to save humanity instead of wanting to rule over it. And that's rad! Speaking of saving humanity, we should probably see how the story ends, right? Let's finish this. When we last checked on our heroes, they had just learned from Lelantos of a new and even bigger threat, Titan Cronus, who had been sealed away eons ago behind 4 crystal walls. Since 3 of them are now destroyed, Cronus could regain his strength and break the 4th wall at any time. So, the Furies embark on a new journey to the dimension of Tartarus, where they confront the fearsome father of Titans, who turns out to be a literal celestial body, the planet Saturn, which was the name the ancient Romans gave this deity. Nice touch. His whole thing is that he believes the world is ruined, infected, humans being the sickness. You know, the whole "we are the virus" bit, but in earnest. His solution is to create a new and improved world, without humans, or free will. Oh, and to erase the old one, of course. Since we can't really allow that to happen, we push onwards until we reach the heart of Tartarus, where Cronus has been waiting for us. And we somehow beat him! I guess you can punch a planet hard enough. After his defeat, a new level mysteriously opens up for us, and inside awaits Prometheus. In a fairly well executed plot twist, Prometheus explains that the world was actually falling apart under his rule. He reasoned that, since he was not human, he could not hope to understand what humanity desires from its leader, so he faked his own death to plunge the world into chaos. From that chaos would raise humanity's paragon, someone who could truly understand what each titan stood for, and thus choose the proper way humanity should be ruled over. We are then presented with a choice. Pick one of these three horrible ideologies, or sticks, to decide the model of governments humanity will be forced under for millennia to come. Sure, sounds great. Choosing Menocius results in, well, pretty much what you'd expect. Prometheus reigns over humanity with an iron fist, following Menocius' ideal of a perfect ruler. And it's great. For the strong and the loyal, anyway. Not too sure who the weak and unfaithful would be in this situation. Maybe those who prefer cardio? Look, it's a totalitarian regime, so it's gonna be a hard pass on that one. If you pick Coeus, you get, again, what it says on the tin, really. No ideology or purpose other than progress, whatever that means. And even though unlimited scientific and technological advancement sounds great, in theory, I wouldn't trust a warmongering turtle who seems to only ever make weapons to drive society forward, especially with no regard for ethics and at any cost. Read like any science fiction story ever. That road always leads to the world ending, one way or another. Lelantos is just the obvious worst choice. It expectedly doesn't result in anything positive or useful, there's just less people now. And they look similar, I guess. It's a very Thanos approach to problem solving. I've said all I had to say about Lelantos and his solution earlier in the video. I'm tired of him. Styx, however, is a much more interesting choice.
Oh, this is beautiful.
When I first played the game, I was really surprised to see Styx here because, unlike the other titans, she had never expressed any real interest in ruling over humanity. She makes a passing remark about how, if she had her way, everything would be equal forever, but that's about it. And apparently, that's all there is to her philosophy. Choosing her means everything is perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Which, in turn, kills individual motivation, since every achievement is made towards a greater good now. I don't know, this one really doesn't sound as bad as the other three, but I'm pretty sure we can do better, right? Well, turns out you can. There's one last secret option which unlocks the game's true ending, and that is punching Prometheus in the face. You tell him you're choosing your own way of doing things from now on, and he takes it surprisingly well. Oh, no, sorry, he actually wants to destroy you now. Well, I guess that means war. After defeating the King of the Titans, you explain that humans are not a monolith. You can't rule all of humanity with a one-size-fits-all mentality, and people change their minds on what they want and need often enough that a timeless, eternal ruler with an unchanging perspective just doesn't make sense for us. Humanity knows itself best, or at least better than any titan could, so the logical conclusion is that we should rule ourselves. This also aligns perfectly with what Teddy said he wanted to convey through the game's narrative. Oh, yeah, I actually asked Teddy what the game was about in our interview. And if you're wondering why I didn't mention this before, it's because his answer doesn't really make sense unless you finish the game and obtain this ending. Yes, the Titans are standing for fascist ideology, and there are many parallels to be drawn between the game and World War II, but that's not what the game is about. This, at its core, is a coming-of-age story. Narratively, I wanted to convey what it means to grow up. To me, growing up means thinking for yourself. We made the choices at the end of the game to all have terrible outcomes because we wanted the player to strive for something better. The only way to see the true ending is if you, the player, rejected all of the ideals proposed to you by the gods. Before falling into his centenary slumber, Prometheus even seems to agree with us in the end. And thus, with a renewed sense of hope, the Furies look upon a world in peace. Hopefully, we'll be able to say the same one day. Thanks for watching.